The Challenger disaster. On the morning of January 28, 1986, the temperature at Cape Canaveral had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the solid rocket boosters on the Space Shuttle Challenger, had been arguing through the night that the launch should be postponed. Their concern was specific and documented. The O-rings, rubber seals designed to prevent hot gas from escaping the joints of the rocket boosters, had never been tested in temperatures this cold. They believed the cold would make the rubber brittle. They believed a brittle O-ring could fail. They had charts. They had data. They had spent hours on the phone with NASA managers begging for a delay. NASA had already delayed the mission multiple times. There was a teacher on board, Christa McAuliffe, selected through a national program designed to capture public imagination. The pressure to fly was enormous, and the engineers' concerns were dismissed as insufficient proof, as not meeting the standard required to halt a mission. One NASA manager reportedly told the Thiokol engineers to take off their engineering hats and put on their management hats. The launch was approved. 73 seconds after launch, Challenger broke apart. But that is not where the story ends. The crew cabin did not explode. It separated from the disintegrating shuttle intact and continued upward on its own momentum before beginning a 2-minute and 45-second fall toward the Atlantic Ocean. When investigators recovered the wreckage from the ocean floor, they found that 3 of the crew's personal egress air packs had been manually activated. Someone, in the seconds after the breakup, had reached over and switched them on. The crew was alive after the explosion, conscious, aware of what was happening. They fell for nearly 3 minutes before the cabin struck the water at over 200 miles per hour. The Rogers Commission investigation afterward found that the technical failure was real, but secondary. The warning had been given. The decision to ignore it had been made in a conference room by people who were not cold enough, not frightened enough, and not listening carefully enough. The 7 astronauts did not die because of an O-ring. They died because of a meeting. The Donner Party. In the summer of 1846, a group of settlers heading west toward California were offered a choice. They could take the established trail, the one that was longer but known to work, or they could try a new route promoted by a man named Lansford Hastings in a guidebook he had written without actually traveling the full path himself. The Hastings cutoff promised to shave significant distance off the journey. 87 people chose the shortcut. The logic was sound. The information was wrong. The cutoff took them through the Wasatch Mountains, where they had to cut their own road through dense forest, losing weeks they could not afford to lose. It took them across the Great Salt Lake Desert, where the crossing nearly destroyed their livestock and their supplies. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada in late October, they were exhausted, behind schedule, and running low on food. Then the snow came early. The mountain passes closed. They were trapped. What the Donner Party accounts document, across multiple survivor testimonies, is not a dramatic collapse, but a slow and methodical one. People weakened over weeks. The first to die were the elderly and the children. Once the food was gone entirely, the survivors faced a decision that has no good answer. They butchered the dead. They removed the organs first. They cut the muscle from the bones. Some families refused to eat members of their own family and starved to death, while others around them did not. The ones who refused did not survive longer out of dignity. They simply died with more of it. Of the 87 who entered the mountains, 48 came out. It all began with a guidebook written by a man who had not checked his own directions. The Franklin Expedition. In 1845, the British Royal Navy sent 2 ships into the Arctic under the command of Sir John Franklin to complete the Northwest Passage. The expedition was considered one of the best-equipped polar voyages in history. 3 years of provisions, steam engines, the full confidence of the most powerful navy in the world. Everyone involved believed this was manageable. The ships became icebound near King William Island in September 1846 and never broke free. Franklin died in June 1847. The remaining men, over 100 of them, abandoned the ships in April 1848 and attempted to walk south towards safety across one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Forensic analysis of the recovered remains tells the story in clinical detail. The men were dying of scurvy, which causes the body to essentially unmake itself. Old wounds reopen, teeth fall out. The connective tissue that holds muscle to bone begins to break down. They were also dying of lead poisoning, likely from the poorly soldered tins that held their food supply, which causes neurological damage, confusion, and eventually a kind of slow cognitive disintegration. The men walking south across the Arctic ice were not fully rational. They were starving, bleeding internally, and losing their minds. The bones that were recovered showed cut marks, the same forensic signatures found on animal bones at butchering sites. In the final weeks, the survivors ate the dead, not as a last resort in a moment of crisis, but as a sustained practice that went on long enough to leave marks on multiple sets of remains found miles apart. Every single one of the 129 men died. None of them made it. The Hindenburg. On May 6, 1937, the German airship Hindenburg approached its mooring mast at Lakehurst, New Jersey, after a transatlantic crossing from Frankfurt. Hydrogen-filled airships had been operating for years. The Hindenburg itself had completed dozens of successful flights. The risk had become invisible through familiarity. What the technology had always contained was a fundamental and unresolved problem. Hydrogen is extraordinarily flammable. The Hindenburg carried over 7 million cubic feet of it. The ship had been designed to use helium, which is non-flammable, but the United States had refused to sell it to Nazi Germany. The German engineers redesigned the ship for hydrogen and declared it safe. It had been safe until it wasn't. The fire started at the tail. Hydrogen burns nearly invisible. What witnesses saw was the outer fabric catching and the structural framework beginning to collapse. The ship fell in approximately 34 seconds. For the people still inside when it hit the ground, the options were to burn or to jump. Survivors described passengers on fire running the length of the collapsing gondola. Some jumped from heights that killed them on impact. Some who survived the fall died of burns in the following days. 36 people died. The footage traveled around the world immediately. The era of commercial hydrogen airship travel ended that evening, not because the technology was new, but because the world finally saw what it had always been. The Bhopal disaster. In Bhopal, India, in December 1984, a Union Carbide pesticide plant was operating with a series of known safety problems that had gone unaddressed. Cost-cutting measures had reduced staffing. Safety systems had been shut down. A refrigeration unit designed to keep a tank of methyl isocyanate at safe temperatures had been turned off months earlier to save money. Workers had reported problems. Inspections had flagged concerns. Nothing changed because fixing the problems cost money, and the plant was already operating at a loss. On the night of December 2nd, water entered the tank. The resulting reaction generated enormous heat and pressure. The tank ruptured. A cloud of toxic gas rolled out of the plant and across the sleeping city. Methyl isocyanate destroys tissue on contact. In the lungs, it causes the air sacs to flood with fluid. The body's response to the chemical burns fills the passages with liquid, and the person drowns from the inside. The gas is denser than air, which means it settled close to the ground, at the level where children sleep. Survivors described waking to a burning sensation in their eyes and throat, then losing their vision, then losing the ability to breathe. People ran without being able to see. Many ran in the wrong direction, deeper into the gas cloud. Animals died in the streets. Bodies were found in positions that showed people had been running when they fell. Estimates of the immediate death toll range from several thousand to over 10,000. Hundreds of thousands more were injured permanently. chronic lung disease, neurological damage, blindness. Children born to survivors in subsequent years showed elevated rates of birth defects. The consequences were still being counted decades later. The refrigeration unit was off because it saved money. The safety systems were understaffed because it saved money. The warnings were ignored because addressing them cost money. The gas that killed thousands of sleeping people was the accumulated interest on every one of those decisions, paid all at once in a single night by people who had nothing to do with making them. The O-ring that was too cold, the shortcut that was too good to be true, the ships that were too well equipped to fail, the safety system that was too expensive to maintain, the gas that was too familiar to fear. Every one of these catastrophes had a moment, somewhere before the end, where a different choice was available. The tragedy is not that humans made mistakes. The tragedy is that almost every time, someone already knew, and the people who paid for that knowledge were the ones who were never in the room when the decision was made.